Recording already?
Oh,
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the VSM Practitioners webinars. The purpose of this is not to introduce the viable system model, but to share experiences of how to apply it and learn from that together. Um, this evening will take about an hour. We try to be finished at 7 o'clock. And I'm very happy to welcome Felix Scheb tonight as our guest. Felix has quite a lot of experience. He will tell us about it. He will tell how he got acquainted with the value system model, and he will tell us a little bit about his experiences. And we agreed, Felix and I, that we try to have at least 50% of our time for you so that you can discuss with Felix a bit and share your experiences, ask questions, and so on. What we're doing here is a part of Metaforum. Metaforum, you see the web page address in the lower lines. There's a newsletter with regular information also about these and other webinars. That's what we do. And we are currently here in the webinars, the VSM practitioner webinars part. We had one webinar this year already. Last week we did about 5. This year we had last time Jan Wehinger from Porsche Consulting about his experiences in the automotive industry and the relation of AI and the VSM. And tonight, as announced, Felix. I'll give you an outlook then at the end of the webinar today about the next one. So Felix, I would like to hand it over to you now. You will introduce yourself, I think.
yes, I will do so.
So yes, take it
Um,
away.
Thank you, Martin, and thank
Oh,
you.
just one comment before you start. Sorry. Um, we're quite some participants by now, so I suggest that the participants, if you want to ask a question during the presentation, you're prepared for half an hour approximately. And if you have specific questions or want to say something, please write a comment in the chat, and I will interrupt Felix if adequate, and other than that, we can discuss in the end of the presentation. Okay, Felix, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Martin, and also thank you to Krishan and Angela and all the others from the Metaforum webinar that give me the chance to tell you something about how I or how we as an organization, I work at AlixPartners and Berylls by AlixPartners. We'll tell you something in a minute also about the company shortly, how we apply the viable system model in our projects, and how we got in touch and I think what is quite interesting also to share what works for us, but also what doesn't, and probably hear also from your side if there's any shared knowledge here that we can share, or if there is any experiences that you also made as we did, and how to handle that. Yeah. So. What we want to do is we want to show where we applied VSM, and VSM we always apply in what we call real transformation. So when it actually becomes dirty, that's also what the picture shows here. So when companies have to transform itself quite heavily, not only, let's say, small reorganizations, but to have a real transformation. As Martin said, I'm working for Berylls by AlixPartners, which is a strategy consultancy, mostly in the automotive industry, but also in some other industries, but mostly in the automotive industry. And we are based in Germany. And as you can imagine, the automotive industry in Germany is under quite transformation pressure currently. So VSM is helping us there quite a lot. My name is Felix. I'm an associate partner at Berylls. I don't want to boring you with all the relevant experience here on the right side. But so what I did before is I studied mechanical engineering. Then I got into consulting, working mostly for OEMs and suppliers currently. I'm living in Munich. I'm from Germany, so I'm living in Bavaria, and I have a vacation tomorrow. So there is this Catholic holiday, Martin, that you mentioned. I have a son. I have a dog and a wife, not in that order, but I have a small family in Munich, and yeah, happy to meet you all, and to also get in touch with you, probably also after the webinar. As I said, I'm working for Berylls, which is a company within AlixPartners. Maybe two things that are interesting to know about the companies, and that is also where VSM then comes into place. I will show you that later. Berylls is doing mostly strategy and transformation work, so strategy consultancy, classical downstream, upstream topics, sales marketing topics, operations topics in the automotive industry, always also on the shop floor, of course, when it comes to escalations and de-escalations between OEMs and suppliers, but more on the strategy side. And AlixPartners, its heritage, they are very big in the US, not so big yet in Europe from a market share perspective, but their heritage is definitely in the restructuring and performance improvement. And that's also where the slogan "When it really matters" comes from. So they do a lot of reorganization and transformation, but mostly in, let's say, distressed situations. And I think with this heritage from our parent or mother company, the VSM is in a tension field, and you will see that also later when we come to cases that we actually did or are currently doing. So that's to my person and to my company. As I said, let's come directly into the topic itself. How did I got in touch with the VSM? It was 2014, I think, when Martin and I met. And it was quite interesting because I did some organization and reorganizations projects before that. And to be quite honest, I've never heard of the viable system model before. I knew that there were methodologies to do organizational and reorganizations, organizational work and reorganizations, but in the organization projects that I worked before, we actually never used one of those. Rather than having, let's say, our own method, how to design an organization that worked in some cases quite well, in some cases maybe not. But when I first got in touch with the viable system model, I recognized that there was something missing in the projects before that I was always searching. Let's say the guideline or the guide that guides you through such an organizational journey, so to say. And I was quite happy to meet Martin, of course, then also because he was the perfect teacher, so to say, in our first assignments. Yeah, I'm pretty happy that we met, and still pretty happy to work with him and to use the methodology that I got to know through him. From a company perspective, where do we apply VSMs? I don't know from which country you are, most of you, but if someone here is from Germany, I think most of the icons should be quite well known. And I mean, the automotive OEMs, I'm pretty sure, quite famous supplier. All the other companies in different fields, as you can see, so from suppliers to engineering service providers to industrials and also to software companies, we apply VSM quite everywhere, I would say. It's always a little bit dependent, of course, on what the top management wants to have. But when there is a fit and when there is an interest, let's say on the other side, we definitely use VSM in projects as it is quite a good methodology to get fast to results and not have, let's say, long discussions around personal interests, rather than having a methodology that actually works on the problems that the organization has. That's how we do or where we do VSM. And now I want to come to some points that, in my perspective, are crucial success factors when you apply VSM. And I don't know how many projects or how much experience you have in application of VSM, but I think there are some points that are quite important to know before doing that, or maybe you can also use that in current assignments that you are working on. Doesn't matter if you are from an NGO, from university, from corporate, or from another consultancy. I think when using the viable system model, those are quite keen to follow. So one is, and you can see that from the top left to the bottom right, there is some kind of order, I would say. First of all, I would like to talk to you about understanding and also then about alignment. What is quite interesting, I think, and also then involvement, especially then also of the leadership team. Coming then to practical application and the last topic, and I think that is quite a good topic then also to open the actual Q&A, is to use the viable system model in the context of cost reduction. So yeah, let's dive into those topics. Every topic will be presented in the manner of having a client situation or the situation that we often find when we are in client engagements, and then what we suggest to do. And as Martin said, I'm also happy to answer questions directly when we come to the respective topic. So please feel free to also give feedback while we browse through here. So the first topic I would like to talk about is the understanding and the upfront investment in understanding the VSM itself. So the viable system model, I heard of it the first time and I didn't understand because it uses a very different language. It uses different words than what I was aware of when doing organizational work. It's very important from our perspective to have that profound understanding on both sides, consulting and also then client side, when coming to working with the VSM. So what we see often is that if you don't have a common understanding on the viable system model and you want to apply it in a project, there's a very inefficient discussion culture growing and something that is definitely delaying the project. And therefore we always advise to have a minimum understanding of the VSM in the core team, which is very, very helpful to work with the VSM. So what we typically do is at least a half-day workshop, a half-day foundation session or training session, you can call it as you want, before starting the actual work. If there is a larger transformation, and I will talk about the larger transformation also later, that we were working on, we definitely advise to have even more training and to have also the train by trainer system applied in terms of having other people then train the organization. But yeah, I think you can note yourself down if you want that at least a half a day session in VSM training is very, very helpful. And I'm pretty sure without that, most of the projects that I were working on would not have gone the way they went. The result, I mean, you can also read it. The faster and more efficient design discussions. I think that is quite logic if you have a better understanding. What is very important for me is also that then the client is less dependent on our external work. Not that I don't want to work on a project, but just for the ownership and also the inputs that a client or contributions that a client can give to and design their own organization and not just take our advices and for granted, but to really contribute and co-design their own organization. I think therefore it's very important to have that.
Felix, do you want to take questions now?
Yeah, of course, we can do that.
Ben has a question.
Very quickly, debated with myself a lot about which concepts to present I agree. Some I'm interested that the idea of the minimum literacy. Are there any concepts which you feel like are really critical for them to get to have a successful intervention or to have a successful outcome?
You mean concepts in terms of which part of the VSM or
Like, for example, I feel like requisite variety to me is very critical that they understand that, and
Yeah.
but I'd be very interested to know what you think.
So I think what is very helpful, so one thing that is very helpful is to get them or to present them a practical example on a VSM system. So for example, what I always like is in a training session to have that Germany as a country example. That works quite well. Germany in the European Union, and then Germany, and then you have all the countries within Germany. That explains the recursiveness topic that I think is quite important, and probably the recursion level topic is probably the most can be the most stressing one if not understood on the other side. Yeah. To get recursion levels clear in the beginning, or in the beginning of the organizational work, I think that is probably one of the high rollers, I would say.
Thank you.
Okay. Then next topic would be leadership alignment. I think leadership alignment is very important to have if you have an organizational or a reorganization project, even without VSM. I think what makes it quite special if you use the VSM methodology is that at least in the approach that we use is that in the beginning, very much in the beginning, you do exercises like define how to segment a corporation, and define more or less the management or recursion levels then, which are similar to the management level in the end then. And I think that is work that is very much laying the basis for everything that comes later in the process. And that's why early leadership alignment is very important, as we define how power and how autonomy and how control is distributed and allocated in later stages, very much at the beginning. And I think there we get often or we lay the foundation for good work and fewer later stage interventions, as it is mentioned here, in the end, or in later stages of the process. I think that is very, very important. So what we most of the time do is, of course, if possible, we should involve leadership early and also put them into the actual design team, in the core team. If that's possible, at least part of the top management, top leadership team, board members, etc. Because otherwise, you don't get acceptance for the methodology itself. People are then questioning the methodology on the way, which is not helpful, of course. And on the other hand, you have to, what we also advise to do is to have the VSM methodology and the organizational work aligned with existing leadership forums. What we mean by that is if you can integrate into existing committees or existing steering committees, decision bodies, it's quite easy for the top management to also talk about those topics on the fly, let's say, or if you want to say it like that, and not to have separate forums and separate meetings for that, but they can rather decide on organizational topics while they are meeting in their, let's say, existing leadership meetings. As said before, fewer later stage interventions. I think that is very helpful in terms of time management when it comes to project management, quite important. And of course, then also the higher probability that the new organization is actually implemented, because at least in my experience, it is it also comes, or it also is possible that you do organizational work that is not finding the way into implementation as you want to have. And that is, of course, then a waste of time and also a waste of money from the client. So to have leadership on board quite early definitely helps in actually getting organizations then also implemented if you redesign them with the VSM. Next one, and I think that is probably also something that is a topic that is, I would say, quite recently coming up. If you do VSM in a transformation where also cost pressure is on, for example, as you might have heard in the beginning from me in the automotive industry, that's the case at least. That the topic of role anxiety is a very central design constraint. Yeah. And that is actually one point I think that is not that much VSM specific, but is still, at least in my experience, very much hindering you in actually working on the best organizational setup. If you have people that have a somewhat emotional resistance to what we are doing when we talk about a new organization and how to organize best, because of course then that's normal. Each and everyone has a job, has a career, wants to have their teams and wants to have their leadership positions also after a reorganization. But what we need when we talk about reorganizing by or via the VSM is to have a so-called general management mindset. So not to talk from their current position, but to get into a position where you really want the best for the company and not the best for your team and for your position and your role. And that is something, if you can take those anxieties that are probably occurring and understand what is the issue, create transparency, involve the people, and actually try to get them to shape their future, but not to get the future shaped by other people. I think that is something that is very important to have a very good interaction and also a contribution during the process. Next one is, I think that is something that is very VSM specific. It's the way how we interact. If you are in a client setup, is that of course in the beginning you always come into those projects and each and everyone reads reorganization from the leadership team. Everyone wants to be involved. Everyone wants to talk about those topics. And wants to be part of a design team. But I mean, it's quite logic that if you are a large group, you have probably all the right people and all the right input and functional content on the table, but you have very much slow progress and you have larger discussions than you have actually progress in your design work. And the challenge, of course, is then to balance speed. I mean, if you reorganize a company of I don't know 5,000 to 10,000 people, and you only have 1 or 2 people in the design team, I'm pretty sure that the speed is quite high, but the quality probably is a little bit low because you don't have a very good overview of the whole organization if you are talking to 1 or 2 people. And also you don't really much create a big buy-in when it comes to reorganizing. So that's what we then advise to do, of course, is to start with a very small and capable core team. And there you definitely can also then very much or very good invest some time also in training and don't have big groups that you have to train right from the beginning, rather than having a small team that is very fast but also knows a lot about the organization. I think that is a very good attribute to have people in the design team that are very cross-functional and know a lot about each and every aspect of the company. And then when you come to actually then working on the organization, after the first, let's say, design criteria are defined, and the company is segmented and stuff like that, then you can definitely or should input or bring in more functional experts and have validation and sounding rounds to get that initial design improved and sounded and reviewed, and you get a very big buy-in if you have those people involved early on, but not really much from the beginning, rather than having them, let's say, in the middle of the process, coming into the team as a sounding and expert group. And I think that is also very, very interesting or very important that you also flag that, and you also mention that they are not part of the design team from the beginning. They are sounding team members, and that's also their job. They have to sound, they have to review, but they are not part of the design team. So the design team is the one team that is taking those feedbacks having discussions later on. Then okay, what do we take into account and what probably not. Then one other very important aspect is that you don't, or in my understanding, the client is best helped if we actually solve the problems that the client has. And of course, if we do a reorganization, we try to solve problems. But most of the time, clients see that then as an organizational work and reorganization work. But if we do not really address what the actual issues are, is more or less not really helpful for clients. What I mean by that is that we, of course, diagnose in the beginning what are operational issues, what are issues in your steering dimensions, in your how you do business, but not only from an organizational perspective, but also from a business perspective, and then trying to get to actual practical solutions and designing the organization in parallel. So what I mean by that is, for example, we had a project where we had like, I don't know, like 15 spin-offs, I think, that we implemented during the actual organizational project, where we said, okay, here in purchasing, we have an issue, and here we have an issue with the region, and something like that. And then having people actually address and solve those issues while we design the organization and bring this knowledge that is created in those spin-offs into the design work itself to actually solve those problems then as a project as a whole. If you do that, in my understanding at least, the VSM is then perceived as an actual practical management tool that solves business challenges and not only produces org charts. And I think that is quite important, because I mean, VSM, at least as I got to know it, is not about organizational structure or processes. It is about steering and how all the organizational elements in a company interact with each other and work with each other. And I think there often the problem is or lies, and that's why it's so important to actually solve those real problems that clients have, and while doing that, having also an organization that in the end helps to not get those problems risen up again.
Question.
Yep.
Those spin-offs, have they been designed according to the VSM? So as a real, let me say, example that it works?
No, I think the answer is no, because those spin-offs, they were not organizational subtopics. So organizational design was one project, but when you do organizational work and then you come to the point, so let me make one example. Our purchasing process and the issuing of POs is quite slow, and therefore we lose the best suppliers that we have. That is an issue that is okay, that can be also solved by organizational redesign, right? But probably it's a tool issue, or probably it's just a people issue, and or a process issue or whatsoever. So let's say it like that. It was not a no to each and every spin-off, because I think when I reconsider, there were some spin-offs that were actually also addressing some kind of sub-organizational topics, but most of the topics were actually in the system, tool issues, process interfaces, and stuff like that, that actually, yeah, were not so much dependent on the actual VSM work that we did, but were just some issues that, let's say, hindered the management team to actually focusing on redesigning that organizational part, for example, because they always said, yeah, but if we do it that way or this way, still we have a shitty process. And that's, I think, something that is in their heads and in their minds when they can't really talk about how to organize themselves best without having those problems solved. That's at least my experience. Yeah. Okay, and then last but not least, what I think is quite interesting is that when I got to know the VSM model, is that viable system model, when you use it for reorganizations, is not a cost down measure, or is not a system that is designed or is has its main purpose in reducing costs in an organization. But as I said before, currently most of the companies, due to economic issues, search for those cost reduction potentials. And I always asked myself if VSM is also working also in this field of action, let's say. And I think it works quite well, because we have assignments where we use the VSM model also to address cost potentials. And I think what is the actual benefit of VSM is that it always brings into the focus what clients, so the actual client, then the end client, wants to have, and reorganize and focus on what the client is giving them monies. So the VSM is always trying to organize best without a cost perspective, but still can be used to, let's say, have cost reduction potential, being transparent in such projects. So, for example, VSM heavily addresses complexity issues, right? And complexity is something or tries to manage complexity best, let's say it like that. And complexity is something that produces a lot of organizational cost in the end, because if you have a very complex organization, if you have a lot of complexity to manage, of course, you need big organizations to do that. I mean, there is also, of course, complexity needed, because there are businesses that are very complex, fine. But still, if you try to minimize the complexity, you can also minimize the in VSM language, then the system 2 to 5 work, and then therefore also, of course, FTE and headcount that work in those senior management systems, and actually rather than that, try to focus on the actual work in the operative units, for example. And I think also that recursion level and recursiveness topic is very important when it comes to cost down measures, because what we always see also is that there are a lot of management levels that before applying VSM, corporations are not really aware of that they exist. So, and if you clean up, let's say, in the beginning of a VSM project, those recursion levels, that can also, let's say, free up capacities and best allocate capacities and headcount. Then also where client is actually paying for, and not where the organization, let's say, needs headcount just to manage themselves. Yeah. And I think what is also quite good if you apply the VSM criteria. I mean, VSM wants to decentralize everything, because the maxim is that autonomy is very helpful and to address client needs, right, and customer needs. And on the other hand, if you talk to people that come more from the cost and from the cost pressure side and from the cost reduction side, the centralization topic is always striking. And I mean, the word synergy is something I think most of the corporations can't even hear anymore. But I think there VSM gives a very good answer and gives and asks the right questions, let's say it like that, on that balance between centralization and decentralization, where you can actually have discussions on what makes sense the most for the respective business, and not having personal interest or let's say personal kingdoms grow either on central or decentral side. And in the end, in my opinion at least, and at the client engagement that we are currently working on, also then makes cost reduction potential possible. Exactly. So, and then maybe very short then, because I think we are a little bit.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine, Felix. Just
Okay.
continue. It's very interesting.
So what I want to show you here is just that VSM can be applied quite everywhere. If you look on the left, in the left case and on the right case, you can count from the numbers that the VSM is something that we apply in either in very big corporations and very big companies, but also in smaller teams and smaller companies. And it works quite well on each and every level. Of course, with different questions then and different scopes. But that is something I think that is very, very helpful, that VSM is not just something that that you can use if you have a big corporation with like 20 people working just in the HR department doing organizational work. But you can also do that for small teams and for very small companies. And you can also use it, and that is also quite interesting, I think, for just parts of the corporation. So what we did also recently is to use it not for the corporation as a whole, but for functions, for example. So for, let's say, HR functions, logistics functions, IT functions, you can use it just for that and apply it with the methodology that we use. And it is very, very helpful to have also on those subsystems the VSM methodology, because it asks the right questions, and it's very helpful to have that. Yeah, so much from me. I think the key takeaways definitely invest in VSM understanding, in training, start very small, the smaller the better, and the faster, and then broaden the team and work on real business problems. I think that is very helpful to have client commitment, and also commitment then and understanding of the organization later on. And I think what doesn't really work is if you directly start with organizational charts, right? So I think that is something that the VSM methodology itself is not designed for, because there are many questions you have to answer before that. And don't treat VSM as a theory training. That is, I think, also very important. And as I said before, ignoring leadership, politics, and role anxiety, I think that is something that is an issue for VSM projects, but for most of reorganization projects, at least in the ones that I was involved in. Yeah, so that's from my side so far. I hope it was helpful, and I'm pretty sure there is probably one or the other question. I see at least two hands. I'm happy to
Certainly was
hear your
certainly
questions.
was
Yeah.
very interesting. Thank you very much, Felix. Wow, that was good. What we advise to do, I like it. I have hundreds of questions, and I hated to interrupt you because it was so you were in the flow. So, but I would like to open it up first for others before I ask my questions and my do my statements, please.
Not sure if I was first or Ben
Daniel,
was
yes,
first.
please.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks for presenting these insights, and I would support most of them actually. Some of them I didn't see in my work in exactly the same way, but that doesn't really matter. But what I'm really curious about is involving the company's leaders or the company's people. Can you make a more concrete example? How do you find the right people? How do you sample them, so to say, from the organization's pool of people? And what are your favorite or most impactful formats to involve them? Is it in the end just a workshop in air quotes, or like how can you say a little bit more about this?
Yeah. So maybe let's jump to that slide as an overview. So just for you, the other ones who probably want to ask another question. Yeah, but thank you, Daniel, for the question. So I think first part of the question, what is or which people to involve? My experience is that reorganization or organizational work only works if you do it with the top management. If you're talking about corporations here, for example. So if you do organizational work with the don't get me wrong, but if you do it just with the HR department and the one guy or the one girl who is responsible for organizational development, I'm pretty sure it will fail. So that means when we get in those assignments, we make clear very much from the beginning that we only work with you if also top leadership is involved. And involvement can be in the sounding team, yes, but then we need at least initial interviews and kickoff workshops probably together with them, where they can address their issues and bring their issues in that we then try to solve. Because other than that, I think the buy-in is quite low in the end. And second part of the question, I think what is a powerful format? Yeah, I think what definitely helps is if you have interviews. But I think what is more striking probably, and we did that in one project, and it was quite helpful, is if you do a diagnosis phase in the beginning, with probably some interviews, but then have a consolidation of the results and bring that to the leadership team in any format, right? In any of those leadership meetings, come in and just tell them, guys, when we use the VSM methodology, but I mean, you don't have to mention VSM in that context then, but we think that those are your 5 biggest issues. And I mean, you have to have some hits here, because then everyone is listening. If all the 5 are not the right ones, then I think it's bad. But that could be one format, and that worked at least once quite well. Hope that answered the question, Daniel.
Somebody is suggesting a 5 days integration workshop, well, or also a 3.5 day. Today we can do them a little bit shorter, Dennis. But how about this integration workshop?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, So I was actually also part of a syntegration of many, not many, but 3 syntegration workshops. I've never had that honestly in the beginning of a project. Most of the time I was part of it before, so starting from the design phase into the implementation phase, and there it helped quite well. But I'm pretty sure if you bring up the right, and I mean the first day of this integration is focused on that. If you bring up the right topics in the beginning, and actually have concentrated work 3 days with the top management on those topics, it can be a very, very helpful tool. Yeah.
But you would do that at the end of a design phase, right? Not at the beginning, or what's your suggestion?
At least that's what we did so far. I've not used that in the beginning, but I can imagine that it is quite helpful. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so the purpose of this integration would be to involve people, get a guiding coalition, so to speak, getting into details, solving problems associated with the new target operating model, new
Yeah.
organization. Thank you. Ben, you have your hands up.
Thank you, Felix. That was a very rich and robust presentation. Really enjoyed it. It strikes me that this is quite reality tested, and that this has been drugged through the trenches. So for that, I'm very grateful, because I'm preparing a VSM framework that's going to be tailored for construction projects, large construction projects in the U.S., particularly troubled ones. And I think the VSM is the most appropriate management whole philosophy out there that equips me for that. Now, my specific question is to do with some of that tailoring and the way you've tailored this. I've noticed, for example, you had flattening where some may have expected to see coordination, and I'm no purist, but I'm fascinated in that because I've been debating with myself and others within the industry, senior stakeholders, decision makers behind the scenes who are helping me. I'm kind of using them as a sounding board, what they would reject if I came to them to do a project intervention, or what they would, what would be a rotten egg at the beginning. Now, for example, requisite variety and the law of requisite variety, I probably wouldn't use those words necessarily, but I would introduce the concept, and I plan to use something like Murphy's Law, okay, because Murphy's Law is very well known in the construction industry. No one will. I've never met anyone who would deny that Murphy lives, right? So I'm interested to know a little bit more about how you came, which terms you found to be troublesome, how you may have overcome that. And for example, you said like synergy was a problematic word for you, or at least one that you don't use. If you could just expand on that a little bit, I'd be grateful.
Yeah. Interesting question. Yeah. So I think there's many aspects to it. Let's maybe start with, so for example, that in my understanding, for example, decentralization and centralization is always something that is discussed in organizations, I would say probably longer than I live. Each and every, let's say, 5 years, another party is growing, right? The decentralization or centralization party. And I think what VSM can provide here is a very practical methodology. We have in that approach that we use, Martin's approach. There's a 3-question decision tree that is quite crisp and quite clear to answer if something is centralized or decentralized, and that opens that discussion quite well. And then you don't have to talk about those buzzwords, which are synergy or whatsoever, and you don't have to even use that, right? On that other aspect of the question, I think my experience is actually make it most concrete and try to minimize using those Ashby's law, Murphy's law inclined discussions. At least that's what I'm experiencing, because most of the people, if they are not willing to understand it, they also don't understand it. I mean, we also had clients that were very keen and very interested, and they wanted to know everything about the theory behind. And if we sent them a chapter of a book or a video or so, they listened to it, they watched it, and they asked questions after it. But if most of the time you have people, and let's say the higher the rank and the more successful also in bigger corporations, the people less time they have, let's say it like that, and they don't want to take those topics and actually try to not understand is the wrong word, but try to involve themselves into too much of the theory itself. So if you can make it most concrete and most, let's say, applied already for the specific case, for the specific client, I think the better it is. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
It always reminds me of like Galileo. Galileo, in order to convince the church leaders at the time, they had to look through the telescope. So it requires a little bit of work, and so that's one of the hardest things for anyone who's trying to bring in a new ideas. Is all they got to do is say, "I refuse to look through the telescope," and then the sun still is the center of the universe, or the Earth. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ben. John Lee, please. Can you hear us, John?
Thank you, Felix. Yeah, I had to undo so I'll work backwards. A priori means without evidence. The whole point of before Galileo was everything was a priori. Everything was based on Aristotle. It was all theory. None of it was useful. My first point about VSM is its usefulness, its practicality. So you should be able, with any 5, to explain that they're not in the one position. You should be able to explain to any 3 that they need to have a 3, 4, 5 as well as a 1, 2, 3. They're all living in the 1, 2, 3 reality. The 2 most powerful things to me about VSM, besides recursion, are that it's in real time and it's adapting to a changing environment. My one criticism, Felix, of your excellent presentation is, and frankly, I was born in Munich, but I'm in California, so I'm very confused about everything. So thank you. The point is that we live in a real world that's changing, not in a real world that's about to become finalized. So my one criticism is the difference between better and best. There is no best. There's always better. I love this book, Innovation in Bill Christopher's book, Holistic Management. What he says about innovation is there's always room for innovation. Now, that's your breakthrough with the 5, whoever they are. They can say, no, the way we're doing it now is the way we've always done it, and it's the best. But you can say to them, is there a better way? And VSM is the avenue that you can do that. One of my other points, I've got 2 more points. The other point is the power of the language is to educate people about the transition from static to dynamic. So as soon as you start talking in VSM language, you are talking about requisite variety, and you are talking to them about the limits that they are identifying, and then seeing if there are ways to break through them.
If I may jump in here, John, because I think that's quite an interesting point, and I had that question too, regarding your statement, Felix, you have to invest in literacy. So John is saying basically the same, right? Although it's not a mainstream statement in our community. Most of the people I know say, well, yes, I'm working with the VSM. So how do you work with the client? Oh, no, I'm just using it for myself, and I'm not using it as a language with my client. What do you think about that, Felix? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the experiences you made both kinds of experiences, right?
So the interesting thing is that I think we did for the same client, we did both. So it was a big corporation. And for the one division, about 20,000 people, we used VSM quite prominent. We used it. We trained people. We used the language, and all of the design and sounding people were used to working with the VSM. But for another division, approximately 10,000 people working in it, we didn't use VSM very prominent, but rather used it as a guidance for us, as an external consultancy, to ask the right questions, right? In my opinion, both works, but the first one works even better because it's more easy for us to, let's say, not translate each and everything, but to have a common language that you use. And later on, then, of course, translate into the, let's say, normal business world. I think both works. I would always prefer to have people and clients being open to the methodology and also to the language, because that is something that I think is very interesting with the clients that we work with VSM, and they use it quite prominent, and they got trained by us. If you talk to them, let's say half a year later, whatsoever, you can you hear back that it even after our project, of course, they use elements of it, even though they are not an expert probably. But they use elements of it. They use it in their private life even. So for example, one project lead, she was buying a house and renovating it, and she used also VSM to manage the construction site. So when probably smaller construction sites that you mentioned, but that is something that is quite interesting, I think. So VSM can also enrich people's lives, so to say, besides business. Yeah. So both works. First one definitely easier. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Felix. We're running out of time. Some people already saying goodbye.
Martin, I just had one more point.
Okay.
And that is subsidiarity. I believe that since at least the Roman Legion, we've had too much centralization, and that centralization always wins. And the whole point, as you said about autonomy, is that VSM empowers the one. And that's the most important thing about it. It argues for decentralization in every occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we need to discuss it with our politicians. I think we have the same mess over here as you have in other continents. Thank you so much, Felix. It was very interesting. We will provide the recording of it also on the YouTube channel of Metaforum. Let me share my goodbye screen. Here we are. The next webinar is on July 8th, Louis Harrell, about the viable system model and the operations room concept. What's the actual work on that? What's the innovation? What are the aspirations? Louis Harrell is an expert on that, and he will tell a little bit what he's working on. So hope to see many of you. Then we have a lot of other coming up. If you want to discuss something specific, let me know in the chat. Please leave a note. And other than that, yes, let's say once more, thank you very much. Felix, it was a pleasure having you. And I'm sure that there are many people who will see your presentation also on the YouTube channel of Metaforum. By the way, you can find all these webinars here on metaforum.org. Thank you very much. I wish everybody a nice evening. Thank you for everybody for joining us, for participating. Have a nice holiday, and good luck with your own applications, and share your experience as well sooner or later. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
That was excellent.
Thanks.